Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As we welcome you once again to the Wednesday edition of In Conversation with myself, Inequality, right here on Salam Media. And once again, promising to be quite an interesting discussion. It is a discussion that is absolutely necessary considering what is taking place, and particularly with regard to the United States of America, its position as a so-called superpower in the world, but also many questions that have been raised since Donald Trump has taken office just over a year ago. And many are actually starting to wonder what is taking place in America. But more importantly, are we seeing the decline of America as a global superpower? Now, there are many reasons which we will be unpacking this evening, and also looking at America and its diminishing global influence around the world. How certain is American a future as well? And looking at it strategically from a geopolitical perspective as well, one actually needs to connect the dots. And none better than my guest tonight, and I've spoken to him previously on Salam Media. I think many of you know who my guest is, and we're talking with Yanis Varoufakis this evening, the leader of Mera 25, the Greek political party, belonging to DIEM 25, economist, academic, and also the former Greek finance minister. Yanis, we welcome you on screen as we await your appearance. We do appreciate you taking time out, and thank you, as always, for accepting our invitation to appear as a guest on Salam Media.
It's my great honor. Thank you so much. It's good to be back.
Yes, Yanis, there's just so much to unpack, and I know that there was a video clip that was doing its rounds, and I'm not too sure whether it was AI generated, but it certainly, obviously had you on. It had your voice on as well, but I'm not too sure what it was. But there was just a lot of food for thought in what was said, whether it was AI generated or not. But the key issue here at the moment is talking about America. And as I've mentioned, there are many analysts right across the entire world who are now starting to talk about America and its decline as a global power.
Well, I'm very careful before I proclaim the United States to be a global power in decline. We must not confuse, we should not mix our wishes with our assessment. I would very much love to live in a world without imperialists. I would love to live in a world where the United States no longer has the capacity to dictate terms for the rest of us. But, that's my wish. It's not necessarily what's happening. There's no doubt that there is a decline in terms of both the United States and the West more generally regarding their let's say, capacity to produce things. So, 50, 60 years ago, the West was the most productive part of the global economy. Over the last 60 years, the share of the world's output, which is due to the West and the United States in particular, has shrunk. The United States in ways that, interestingly, Donald Trump has been expressing and has been saying these things. The United States manufacturing industry has collapsed over the last 40, 50 years. Now they just can't build stuff. Even nuclear submarines that they really want to have more of, they can't build them. If you look at railways, anybody who's been to the United States, they are antiquated. They're just ancient railways. You catch the train from Washington to New York, and it's worse than what we used to call the third world. But that doesn't mean that the power of the United States has waned, because there's no such thing as the United States. I mean, what is the United States? You have the ruling class of the United States with its different factions. You've got Silicon Valley, big tech. You have Wall Street. Then you have the real estate agents. All these people are doing really very well. You have the American military. It's never been stronger than it is now. with military bases in 170 different spots around the world. So this is the interesting juxtaposition, the paradox. You've got the capitalist metropolis whose capacity to produce commodities has shrunk, but its hegemonic power through the power of the dollar and its military is much greater than it ever was. So the question is, how long can this incongruity, this paradox, be maintained? And interestingly, I want to stress this, it's not just you and me from an anti-imperialist perspective that we're looking at this paradox and we're wondering how long can it last. It's also Donald Trump. Because effectively what Donald Trump has been trading on is the inverse of my point of view. From my point of view, I don't want to speak for you, you speak for yourself. But from my point of view, there is a paradox. There is the immense power of the dollar and the American military and the shrinking significance of American manufacturing capacities. And that is unsustainable. And I don't want it to be sustained. And I would like to see the United States ruling class be cut to size, because it is that ruling class which is the imperialist force in the world. And then you have Donald Trump, who's looking at exactly the same paradox. He's got exactly the same assessment that, this paradox can't continue for very long. But what he wants is to enhance the hegemony and not to see the United States imperialism retreat. So it's an interesting time.
Well, look, these certainly are interesting times, but also I think, there's, when one looks at history of empires and empires that have risen and have fallen as well, and looking at the United States of America, I think next year we're looking at about 250 years of existence of the United States of America. And when one considers and one tries to actually break this down even further in terms of what you're saying, and there is no doubt that America is still a formidable force right across the entire world. And for the reasons that you mentioned, whether we're talking about military bases, whether we're talking about, the largest economy in the world, many countries are dependent on the United States of America as well. But, if we break it down internally and externally, and let's just talk about internally, for example, Yanis, let's talk about the rising debt in America, the economic weakness as well. And under these conditions, there is internal division, there's political polarization that is taking place in the United States of America. We see what is taking place with immigration, white supremacy starting. Or the other. Sorry, Yanis, I think there was just a bit of a break in communication.
Yeah.
I'm not too sure how you heard, but I'm saying internally there are just so many factors that obviously are red flags or possible indicators that something is starting to give internally in the United States of America.
Yeah. Well, to begin with, I think it's really important not to make the mistake of thinking in liberal centrist terms. Donald Trump doesn't make that mistake. We shouldn't make that mistake either. So let me give you an example. You highlighted the problem of debt in the United States. There's no doubt that the United States has a huge debt, both the public debt and the private debt. And yet, that debt is part of its power. Because, if you and I owe $3,000 to a bank, we're in serious trouble. But if you owe 100 billion or 5 trillion or 20 trillion or 70 trillion, then you don't have the problem. The problem belongs to the person that has lent you that money. So take, for instance, the United States as a whole, right? I mean, the United States owes around $70 trillion. 70 trillion, that's 7,000 billion. Okay? $70,000 it owes to foreign capitalists. Now, is this a problem or a strength? It is a strength. Let me give you a very, a tiny sliver of an example of this larger case. Take China. Now, China owns around 4.5 trillion, 4,500 billion of American government debt, those treasury bills, bonds. Now, who is this a problem for? It's not a problem for America. It's a problem for China. Because let's say that, the Chinese government could press a button and suddenly the United States goes bankrupt. Well, essentially, it will be annulling its own savings. So, it's not a good idea to look at the United States and say, oh, they owe a lot of money, so they're in trouble. No, they're not. The reason why the United States is in trouble is because you have the class struggle in the United States reaching an apotheosis. The United States, like all capitalist countries, are very divided. So you have the working class in the United States whose life prospects are devastated. So, this is the reason why Donald Trump is president, because he looked at them in the eye, unlike Hillary Clinton, unlike Kamala Harris and so on, and said to them, I recognize that you have been totally and utterly sacrificed by the ruling class. Of course, he doesn't tell them that he's a member of the ruling class. They should know better. But anyway, that's what he does, and they're right. And he is right. Because this, the working class in the United States, if you go to anywhere in between the East Coast and the West Coast, and you visit any working class town, you see carnage. Post offices have shut down. Bank branches have shut down. The shopping malls are either derelict or half empty. So, the majority of people in the United States are finding it extremely hard to make ends meet. If they get ill, they go bankrupt. If they get bankrupt, they lose their home. If they lose their home, then they get more ill, and this cycle continues. So, you've got the working class, which is in dire straits. But then you have big tech, Silicon Valley, which has a capacity, without employing that many people, effectively to control the means of communication of the rest of the world. And through controlling the means of communication of the rest of the world, they have the capacity to extract gigantic amounts of money, rent, I call it, economic rent, from the rest of the world. This is why you have this amazing sprouting of capitalizations of the big tech companies. Then you have the banking system in the United States, which controls everything. So if you in South Africa want to make a payment, if you want to send money to buy anything, to anyone, you have to go through the dollar system. Even if you don't buy anything from the United States, right? You will, every time you put petrol in your car, if you have a car, or every time you buy electricity, essentially you're increasing the demand for dollars. So if some bank in the United States benefits from it. So this is where we are. There is the only source of hope is that what we have, which I tried to describe, is simply not sustainable. Now the problem is this: that when the unsustainable at some point inevitably proves to be unsustainable and collapses, who benefits? Is there going to be some progressive change in the United States that will bring into greater alignment the interests of the of the working class, of the majority of the Americans, with the majority of the global South? That would be great, wouldn't it? But as we know from the mid-war period of the 20th century, in the 1930s, let's say, when you have a systemic capitalist collapse, it's more likely than not that the fascists will rise up, and the result will be more warmongering, more war, and more destruction.
Well, certainly. But also, I think what is important to understand as well is America, for a very long time, Yanis, has been seen as a defender of democracy. And we see a lot of double standards playing out. We see big money politics that is playing out, and yeah, you've articulated a lot of that. Whether we're talking about the tech industry, we're talking about the banking industry, but what we see is social decadence. We're seeing loudmouth leadership in the form of Donald Trump as well. Now, all these factors, obviously, internally, are playing out in the United States of America, and the respect that the world has had for the United States of America appears to be diminishing. And we're seeing it right across many countries, and particularly in the global south.
Well, I have a slightly different view. I mean, you talked about the United States as a great democratic force, a defender of democracy. I don't see it that way at all. I was born, and I think so were you, in countries where we had, here in Greece, we had fascism. In your country, you had apartheid, another form of fascism. And behind those regimes was the United States. The United States was never a defender of democracy. Uh, I, certainly not outside the United States. As I said, the reason why I grew up in a fascist dictatorship was because the CIA engineered the coup d'etat that destroyed our democracy here. So, when people say to me, oh, NATO is a democratic club, I say, what? I grew up in a NATO country, which was a fascist country, courtesy of NATO. So that's point number one. Point number two is, even if you look at America itself, America is not a democracy. Uh, Read the American Constitution. The American Constitution is a Republican one. It's not a democratic one. And the difference is the whole point of the American Constitution is a very smartly written constitution, the purpose of which is to keep the demos, the people, out of the democracy, to ensure that they have regular elections, but that the ruling class is never threatened by the will of the people. This is why you have a system which is by design ungovernable. Yeah, think about it. You have a situation where you've got Congress vetoing the White House, or the White House vetoing the Congress. You've got the states versus the federal government. It is designed to be in constant paralysis. Why? Because the ruling class, the oligarchs, do not want democracy to work. They want a state. They want to be able to borrow using public debt for the purposes of financing the ruling class, because this is what it does, right? I mean, when the Pentagon, buys weaponry from the military-industrial complex using debt that they sell to the Chinese, to the British, to even American working-class people or middle-class people, right? They are enriching the shareholders of the military-industrial complex. And so debt for the many becomes riches for the few. And the whole point is to make sure that the many don't have a word. They don't have a say in how the place is run. And this is how, this is the first past the post system. You have a system in the United States which regularly elects a president that didn't win the majority of the country. This is not a democracy. It's an oligarchy with equations. It's oligarchy with sorry, something happened to my system. I don't know. Can you hear me? Right.
Yes, now I can. Go ahead.
Yeah, there was an interruption. So it's oligarchy with elections, and therefore, I would also like to challenge the point that you made that the United States was highly regarded around the world, and now somehow it is less highly regarded. I don't think so. In your country, was the United States highly regarded when they were supporting the apartheid regime? No. I don't believe so. Were they highly regarded in Vietnam, in Iraq, in Afghanistan? They were highly regarded amongst the bourgeoisie, the ruling class of the West, of Western countries, of European countries, because essentially the United States regime propped up the ruling classes, as long as they were kept in their place. So even if you look at, people like President Charles de Gaulle of France, the greatest president in the post-war period of France, he didn't have the United States in great regard. He referred to actually his finance minister, a gentleman called Giscard d'Estaing, was highly critical of the way that the United States was deploying the American dollar against its allies. He was the one who coined the term exorbitant privilege for the dollar, effectively saying that the United States are freeloading on the rest of the world. So, I'm always very doubtful and critical of people who say, oh, things are not the way they used to be. Because, this feeds into MAGA, into make America great again. America was never great. It was never good at defending democracy. It was never a particularly good ally of other nations. It wasn't spreading humanism. It was spreading from the very beginning, with few exceptions early on, when they were anti-imperialist, simply because they were anti-British. they did have a decent reputation before they became an empire. But the moment they became an empire, they started killing democratically elected leaders, one coup d'etat after the other. They had, they committed war crimes everywhere. There's not a single American president since 1945 who has not committed war crimes. So let's not eulogize the America of the past and say that now somehow it has declined in terms of its humanism. It hasn't. It was always pretty misanthropic.
Yes, but Yanis, let's just talk a bit about these countries. And you mentioned, many countries from the West that actually viewed America as a democracy. And let's just break it down. And looking at these countries now, we've seen so much happen in the last few months. Nicolas Maduro, we've seen what has taken place with Venezuela, the whole issue surrounding Greenland. We've seen how Canada has actually reacted to Donald Trump as well, and obviously the visit to China as well, where Canada, right next door to America, is looking at China as well. Are we seeing signs of at least diminishing global influence as a result of some of these actions by the United States of America?
Not really. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but
No, you're not. You're not. I think obviously, it's quite an interesting discussion. So obviously, it does add another dimension to what we are discussing. Yes.
There's no doubt that Donald Trump is annoying his allies. The Canadian Prime Minister, the Australian Prime Minister, the German Chancellor, the French President—they're all up in arms against Donald Trump. There's no doubt about that. But, what does this mean in practice? I hear people saying, oh, he's destroying the international rules-based order. Well, that never existed. It's a figment of your imagination, folks. There was never a rules-based order. When, the Americans wanted to invade Iraq, they invaded Iraq. Did they ask the permission of the United Nations? No. When I hear people saying, that Vladimir Putin is terrible because he's trying to use military force in order to change the borders in Europe. Well, that may be true, but who did it first? The Americans under Bill Clinton, together with the Italians and the Germans and the Brits and the French, who bombarded Yugoslavia in order to change the borders of Yugoslavia, to create Kosovo, to carve Kosovo out of Yugoslavia, out of Serbia. Now, I'm not saying that I'm not passing judgment on this. What I'm saying is that we have a tendency to convert a kind of journalistic analysis, which is really very paper thin, into a geostrategic conversation, which is really not worthy of the circumstances that we are facing. Trump is annoying middle powers, but still, that doesn't change the fact that they are running to him like lapdogs, begging for, his approval. You have the former Dutch Prime Minister, Mr. Mark Rutte, who is now the General Secretary of NATO, calling him daddy. Did you hear that? And, you have the Chancellor of Germany, the President of France, going to the Oval Office and sitting around like pupils in, grade 5 being smacked about by daddy. And then they object to that. And what do? Nothing. They buy more weapons from him. They play along with his diminution and destruction of the United Nations. He he personally annexes, not the United States, but he annexes Gaza, right, by creating what he called the Board of Peace, which is a corporation that he owns for life. He hasn't paid for it. And, it takes over Gaza. And then, Europeans say, okay, fine, let's go along with that. And then he proclaims that this Board of Peace, this corporation that he owns, is not going to replace the United Nations. And what do the United Nations do? Nothing. Nothing. No condemnation, nothing. Now, I hope, and maybe you hope that too, you'll let me know. But speaking for myself, I hope that this unshackled imperialist ambition by Donald Trump is going to intensify tensions within the Western Bloc, and that is going to bring about a new non-aligned movement in the Global South, where the Global South will create its own payment systems. It will liberate itself from the tyranny of the dollarized payment systems, and that we will succeed in doing that which we failed in the 1970s. Remember the new economic order, the non-aligned movement, which crashed and burned. Maybe Donald Trump will give us the impetus to succeed this time around. But to assume that because he is annoying the hell out of the Canadian Prime Minister, or the British Prime Minister, or the German Chancellor, that this is automatically going to do that, that's pie in the sky, and we should not indulge in it.
Well, very, very interesting, Yanis, in fact, and I think I'm actually quite glad that we are having this discussion. But essentially, we've seen the United States of America over and over again launch what we can call economic warfare against, many a country. And again, this obviously is creating a situation that is providing an uncertain future. You've been mentioned, you're talking about the dollar as a reserve currency. Many are saying that it will lose ground. You feel that at this point in time, this is not going to be the case. But the key issue here, again, is there a formidable adversary to the United States of America? We know there is talk of Russia, we talk of China as formidable adversaries. I mean, can they do it? You speak about the Global South as well. They need to rise, they need to wake up. Are we likely to see the Global South, for example, rally behind countries like Russia and China?
I'll be very brief in my answer. The great difference, and I think this is a source of hope, at least for me, between today and, let's say, 1971. Why am I mentioning 1971 here? Because in 1971, there was another president of the United States who was very abusive towards everyone, the Europeans, the Global South, back then the Third World, Richard Nixon. He's the one that weaponized the American dollar and essentially destroyed the post-war order and imposed a new form of American imperialism and hegemony after blowing up the Bretton Woods system and so on. The difference between today and 1971 is that in 1971, there was no serious economic competitor to the United States and Europe, but primarily the United States. The Soviet Union had proven, despite many successes that it had, by the late 1960s, the Soviet Union had no capacity to expand its productive and technological base in such a way as to challenge the West. Today, one word in your answer, in answer to your question: China. China works. It's really very simple. China works. It proves that a form of communism, Chinese-style communism, works, and it works better than, much better than the Soviet communism ever worked, and better than American, financialized capitalism is working. At every level, China is besting the United States technologically, in terms of old style industry, aluminum production, steel production, housing, in terms of new tech, that is what I call cloud capital, digital capital. Even when it comes to AI, half of the world's top AI experts are Chinese today, as we speak. They started at a very low level, but in the last 3 years, they have improved exponentially. When it comes to green energy, China, which was a cesspit of pollution up until recently, today are decarbonizing at a magnificent rate. They have 40,000 miles of super high-speed railways, something that the United States can't even dream of. So, yes, China is a remarkable success story. And that is, you can see that Donald Trump is effectively, even though he started when he became president first time, Trump 1.0 back in 2016. He started the new Cold War against the Chinese. He tried to keep China in check, and he embarked on the new Cold War, the purpose of which was to contain the economic success story that was China, and he failed, and he recognizes that. You saw that recently. He struck, a peace deal with President Xi of China. In April, they are going to extend. I'm sure they will extend this peace deal. Now, Russia is irrelevant from that perspective. It is a Chinese economy which is creating these narratives of success in juxtaposition to the relative failures of the United States and particularly Europe. Now, the rest of the global South, well, this is a big question, isn't it? Take your country, for instance. What is the ruling class in South Africa going to do? How close do they want to get to the Chinese? What about India? We know that there is a massive, massive clash between India and China, but at the same time, they both belong to the BRICS, and they have created a very interesting payment system, BRICS Pay. Now, so in other words, this is work in progress.
Yes. Yanis, it's interesting when one looks at or talks about China and the United States of America. Can these two countries survive without each other?
Oh, there's no doubt that China can. China is becoming pretty autarkic. It's a large country. They have invested massively. In other words, let me put it this way. Suppose, science fiction now, you press a button and China is totally cut off from the rest of the world. China can continue functioning pretty well too. I wouldn't be able to say this 3, 4, 5 years ago, but today they can, especially given their great advances when it comes to energy. They are now in a position to harness solar and wind power in ways that are making amends for the great reliance that they used to have on fossil fuels from abroad, from Africa, from the Middle East, and so on and so forth. The United States, on the other hand, are utterly incapable of producing the means of existence. Even though it is a closed economy, relatively closed economy, the United States have subcontracted most of their manufacturing capacities to the rest of the world, including to China. And, therefore, this dependence is asymmetrical. Now, I'm not arguing in favor of separating China from the United States or from Europe for that matter. But my answer speaks to your question about the relative reliance of one on the other.
Well, certainly. But also, I think, just coming back to what we discussed earlier and looking at the internal dynamics that are playing out in American politics, the Trump factor, and just to understand how much this has actually contributed to what we have been discussing at this point in time. because it is clear that Trump is at the crossroads. I mean, he's facing many challenges internally. I know he's been trying to avoid the discussion on the Epstein files as well, because that seems to be the major talking point. But also in terms of internally, and although I mentioned briefly about immigration, about the white supremacy, because that is also starting to creep. Racism, we've seen what has happened just recently with regard to what Trump had posted regarding Barack Obama and his wife as well, depicting them as apes as well. Now, all these factors obviously are playing out, and clearly, something has got to give, particularly in America and within the American political system, Yanis.
Look, there is no beating about the bush regarding the fact that Trump will fail. The failure of Trump is designed into the Trumpian political movement. Why am I saying that? The reason why he's president is because the working class voted for him. The working class in the United States has been denigrated. It has been diminished. It has been treated like, cattle that lost its value in the marketplace by the Democrats and by the centrist, center-right Republicans, the Bushes and the Reagans and so on. Trump comes in and energizes the blue-collar workers, the people who actually voted for Obama in 2008, who were betrayed by Obama in 2008 and then again in 2012. And what he says to them is this. We are living in a very rich country and you're very poor. The powers that be, the elites, live in the coast, West Coast, East Coast, and they fly over you and they treat you with contempt. And their factories have all shifted to China, to Bangladesh, to Vietnam, and they are making you buy the stuff that these foreign brown workers are producing. So the problem is the foreigners, but also those who have shifted their factories abroad. And I am going to look after you. In exchange for you shutting up, forgetting about trade unions, democracy, having a voice, having rights, you give me all the power. This is what fascists always do since Mussolini, right? This is the social contract they offer the disaffected working class. I'm going to look after you. I'm going to put up barriers to stop the foreigners from coming to steal your jobs, putting up tariff barriers in order to stop the products that the foreign workers, the brown workers are producing from coming in. That will force foreign capital to come in and build factories where there are none, where they've all closed down. So I'm going to look after you. And, the trade deficit is going to vanish and everything will be okie dokie. Now, the problem with this, the reason why I'm saying that this political project is bound to fail, is that let's say that it succeeds. Let's say, I'm not saying it will, assume, hypothetically, that these tariff barriers are going to bring lots of factories from Germany, from Japan, from Korea. They will migrate to Georgia, to Mississippi, to Missouri, and so on and so forth. Let's say it does. Then what happens is that the American trade deficit, which is gargantuan, is going to shrink as more stuff is produced domestically in the United States and imports are reduced. Yeah? Yeah, but why is the real estate sector? Remember, Trump is a realtor, right? That's his milieu. That's his industry. That's his sector, right? His what he does, real estate. Why is real estate so rich in the United States? Why are prices so high? Why are the banks doing so well in the United States? Well, that's because foreign money has been going into the United States, into the stock exchange in New York, the banks of Wall Street, and into real estate. It's the foreign money that comes in that pushes real estate prices up in the Hamptons, in New York, in Miami, in California. So if he shrinks the trade deficit of the United States, that tsunami of money, foreign money that comes to the United States will also shrink. Why am I saying that? Think about it. It's really not difficult. When Americans purchase German goods, They use dollars. They print dollars and they give it to the Germans. The Germans send them their Mercedes Benzes, whatever. Okay, and the Germans end up with dollars. And what do what do the Germans do with the dollars? They can't do anything with them in Germany, so they have to send it back to Wall Street. So you see, the trade deficit, the imports, American imports from Germany, are financing the money that goes from the dollars that go from Germany into Wall Street and real estate in New York. So if he succeeds to shrink the American trade deficit, then he will have dampened the real estate market in New York, in Miami, in California, and he will have damaged the American banks. Why am I saying so? That's my conclusion, right? If he succeeds to do that which he promised the American working class, he's going to annoy the real estate sector, his own crowd, and the Wall Street bankers. So he has to choose whom does he annoy. His own clan, the ruling class of realtors and estate agents and bankers, or the working class. Believe you me, he will betray the working class. So eventually, the working class are going to reject him. I don't know how will it take place now in the midterms, later on, I don't know. But this is why I'm saying that the Trumpian agenda is bound to lose, to fail. The question is, how does he prolong that period before the failure is evident? And the answer is through increasing authoritarianism. This is why he sends the troops into cities like Minneapolis, like Portland, like Chicago. This is why he abducts Maduro, because he's trying to distract his own MAGA working class base from the fact that he's failing them.
Well, certainly. And I think just finally, Yanis, obviously one cannot compare the rest of the world to China, when dealing with the United States of America as well. And obviously the question is, as things stand right now, our country is able to survive without the United States of America. And I think what we are seeing, there are a lot of negotiations that have taken place. And from the time Trump took office, actually, even in the second term as well, we've seen a lot of negotiations take place between countries and the United States of America. But is it more out of desperation and the fact that they can't survive without the USA?
Well, look at your country. Look at my country. We have a ruling class. You have a ruling class. We have a ruling class, which is subservient to Washington. It's not that your country needs America. It's not that my country needs America. Our ruling classes need America. They need the United States to have power over us. So you see, this is if one message comes across to you, our audience, through me, it's this. This is not a clash between China and the United States. It's not a China between South Africa and the United States or France and the United States. This is a class war happening in our own countries, where our own ruling class is in cahoots with parts of the ruling class in the United States against both our people and the Americans, the blue-collar Americans. So, that's why we need international solidarity. Less diplomacy, more solidarity.
Well, I think, that obviously sums it up, really. I think that final answer from you really sums it up very, very well. Yanis, really, as always, an absolute pleasure having you with us. And, I'm truly, truly glad and thankful to you for always taking time out for us at Salam Media. We wish you all the best, sir, and please take care.
Thank you so much.
Yanis Varoufakis with us this evening on In Conversation with myself, Inayat Wadi, on this Wednesday evening. And just to remind our listeners and viewers that the next hour is going to be a simulcast in collaboration with a number of media houses as well. And obviously courtesy of UCSA, the United Ulama Council of South Africa, together with Islam City. And this is quite interesting because we have got Sheikh Salman Fredericks, who is an alim, he's an attorney, he is a a subcommittee member with the United Ulama Council of South Africa, and this is going to be a simulcast on a variety of media houses. It's going to be on Salam Media, it will be on Radio Islam, Al Ansar, CII, and also on Voice of the Cape this evening. And this is quite interesting for a South African audience, the Ummah in particular. His topic today is going to be the state of the South African Ummah address for 2026, and it couldn't have come at a more appropriate time and just before the month of Ramadan. So this is going to be quite interesting, so stay tuned. And until we meet again, considering that next week may be the first Tarawih, the sighting of the moon, obviously this could possibly be my last edition of In Conversation with myself, Inayat Wadi, right here on Salam Media. But until we meet, and I'm sure we will be talking a lot, even during the month of Ramadan, from myself and the team, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Next up, it's the State of the Ummah Address 2026 with Sheikh Salman Fredericks.